Hey everybody, welcome to the video. Score the 9-game MLB DFS slate for today on Draftkings. But before we continue, as always, if you guys could just leave a like, and if you're new to the channel, you might as well hit that subscribe button. I'm here all season long trying to help you guys become better MLB DFS players, and I cover other sports as well. So if you're going to keep coming back to the channel each and every single day, or each and every single week, you might as well hit that subscribe button, turn the notification bell so you don't miss out whenever I post new videos. And if you don't follow me on social media, I'm at ChrisPennell16 over on Twitter, CPen16 over on IG. And if you want more content over on Patreon, always much appreciated. We got 300 plus people. You can just get access to all the extra content that I put out throughout the entire day. And if you just want to hop into the Discord chat, ask me questions, or come and hang out before the games and during the games or after the games, feel free to do that as well. So links in the description below if you're interested. If not, hey, that's fine. Let's just dive into today's slate. So, pretty good slate today. I was not a huge fan of yesterday's slate. The pitching was great, but I was not really excited about any of the offenses. But the pitching's really good on this slate, and then we have some really good offenses to target as well. So should be a pretty good one. But we'll start up top here with Walker Buehler. He comes in at 10,200, and he was having a really shaky start to the season. I'm just looking at his game log. He scored 7, 7, 17, and 8. Not what we'd expect from Walker Buehler, but the past two starts have been pretty good. He had 35 versus the Rockies, where he struck out 11, and then his last start versus the same Diamondbacks team, he scored 21.5 fantasy points. Now, the only concern with him is that he does not typically go too deep into games. If we're looking at his pitch count, first game he got eased in at 56, then 79, 87, 89, 92. Then his last start he was down to 71. I don't know exactly why he didn't go that deep into the game. I did not happen to watch that game, but I'd have to imagine he's going to see close to 90 pitches here if all goes well. And I know he's pretty expensive, and Lancelin always goes over 100 pitches, so maybe paying that much for Walker Buehler doesn't make the most sense in the world. But I love the talent from Walker Buehler. He's a fantastic pitcher, and I think 90 pitches is enough. I think it's enough. I'm not expecting 30 plus points from Walker Buehler, but the upside is certainly there. And Vegas likes him here as well. 3.57 implied team total for the Diamondbacks. 68% chance for a win, 6 strikeouts over in Vegas, and his numbers this season have been fine. Not as great as last year, but they've been fine. A 4.07 xFIP, a 28% K rate. The walks are a little bit up at 8%. He's also allowing 1.5 home runs per 9 innings, which is also up, but I still think he's a fine option here. The Diamondbacks don't have the best offense in the world. Now, they've been worse versus lefties just in terms of power and whatnot, but they're not really striking out much this year, but it's still a pretty decently soft matchup here for Walker Buehler. 20% K rate, again, that's pretty low, but an 8% walk rate, 150 team ISO, 240 batting average, and 90 WRC+. So I think Walker Buehler is our SP1 on the slate, but I wouldn't say he's an absolute lock button play. But if you can get up to him, I feel pretty comfortable with Walker Buehler as my SP1 today in cash games, or just really in all formats, even though he doesn't typically go too deep into games. But I think you can pretty much expect 20 plus points here out of Buehler, and I think more than likely he's going to pick up the win because I really like the Dodgers stack on this slate. But if you don't want to go all the way up to Walker Buehler and his, I wouldn't say low pitch count, but you're not going to usually see 100 plus pitches from Walker Buehler. We've got to see that this season, and he's only top 90 once. But a guy that does not have pitch count issues is Lancelin. This guy has gone over 100 pitches, I believe, in every single game so far this season. Yeah, he has. So all 9 of his starts this year, he's been well over 100 pitches, and he's had one bad game this year, and that was his last start. That was versus Houston. He scored 8.3 points, but besides that, he's been very solid. 31, 27, 22, 19, 35, 19, 24, and 14. So kind of 2 roughish starts in a row, but I'm going to give him a pass versus the Dodgers on August 29th, where he scored 14th, because it's the Dodgers. They pretty much crush every single righty that they face. But Lancelin, 3,400. I don't love the matchup versus the Angels, but when you get outside of Mike Trout, Anthony Rendon, and Shohei Ohtani, the lineup's not that great. But if you're looking at their overall splits this season versus righties, they got a 21% K rate. Again, not fantastic for Lancelin. 12% walk rate's actually pretty high. 186 ISO, 250 batting average, 115 WRC+, and a 337 WOBA. The numbers aren't terrible, but also Lancelin's not terrible either, and I think he's going to be serviceable here. I think we can get around 20 fantasy points. I believe he faced them earlier in the season. Yeah, on August 9th, and he scored 19.1 points against them. Went 5 innings, struck out 6 on 110 pitches. I could probably see something like that happening, and it can certainly compete with Walker Buehler for fantasy points scored on this slate, and he's also $800 cheaper, so I have no issues with Lancelin here. The Angels only have a 4.15 implied team total. He is a little bit of an underdog here, but 7 strikeouts over in Vegas, and on the season, 27% K rate and 4.25 xFIP, which is actually a lot higher than his ERA, so he's getting a little bit lucky, but Lancelin's a fantastic pitcher, and he's very safe because he always goes deep into games, so Don't mind Lancelin as I pivot off of Walker Buehler, but both are fine options. Then Andrew Heaney, I'm pretty sure you'd use him as SP2 today. I guess there could be some cases you use him as your SP1, but if you're playing cash games, I think you probably go with like a Buehler or a Lancelin and then pair him with Andrew Heaney. I think he's going to be the chalk pitcher on the slate because he just draws the fantastic matchup versus the Rangers, and pretty much every pitcher that faces the Rangers is usually decently owned on this slate. And Andrew Heaney, I feel like he should be a bit more expensive here, so he kind of slides in as our AZSP2 on this slate. And he's been fantastic his past 2 starts, too. He scored 28 points versus San Diego, which is very, very impressive, especially as a lefty, because they got some guys that can crush left-handed pitching on that team. And then 2 starts ago versus Seattle, he scored 35 fantasy points where he struck out 10. And the pitch count, it's been up there, too. His past 4 starts have been 101, 97, 104, and 117 in his last start. So pitch count is no issue whatsoever for Andrew Heaney. I know it was earlier in the season, but that is long gone. He went 7.2 innings versus Seattle and 7 innings versus the Padres. So I like what I've seen in recent form for him, and he's just a pretty solid pitcher. He's got a good strikeout rate. He can give up some power to both sides of the plate, but he's got a 26% K rate, 28% to the lefties, and 25% to the righties. And the matchup's just kind of what's drawing me in here for the most part. Overall, the Rangers have been a horrible offensive team this year, striking out 23.5% of the time, 134 ISO, 279 WOBA, and a 63 WRC plus. And versus lefties, those numbers are just all pretty low. So I love the spot for Andrew Heaney. I'd probably imagine he's going to be the highest owned pitcher on the slate because you can go quite a few ways at SP1 today, but SP2, I think you're kind of just clearly putting in Heaney for cash games. And you could also throw in Mike Clevenger in the SP1 mix, but I got to be honest, I haven't liked what I've seen from him this season. He just hasn't looked as sharp. I think he's got an xFIP well over 4 this season, and the strikeouts really haven't been quite up there, so I kind of left him off the list, but I don't mind him versus the Rockies, but he's nearly $10,000, which I'd rather just play Lancelin, to be honest. But off that tangent, so if you want to go for a cheap option, I think Joe Musgrove is also viable here, but Sixto Sanchez, I'm just a Sixto Sanchez fan, to be honest, and he's still pretty cheap here at 6,200, and the guy's got electric stuff. If you guys been watching Sixto Sanchez's games, it's pretty fun to watch. He can throw a 100-mile-per-hour fastball. He's got a dirty changeup. Now, I will say the matchup versus Atlanta is not one I'm looking forward to, and they actually have one of the higher team totals on the slate. I looked at another website. They had a team total up yet. From what I pull from, it wasn't up, but I think they're around 5, a little bit over 5, which obviously does not get me excited for Sixto Sanchez, but the price tag is drawing me in here. I'm not expecting a complete game shutout from Sixto. You don't need that at 6,200. He can give up a couple of runs, but if he can rack up some strikeouts, I think he should be able to get the job done at 6,200. In his 3 starts this season, he scored 13 points versus Washington. Again, he was very cheap. Then versus Tampa Bay, he was only 5,900. He scored 31 fantasy points. And then his last start versus Toronto, he was 18.2 fantasy points. And at only 6,200, I think he's okay. The Braves actually have been striking out a bit so far this season. If you're looking at their splits versus righties, at 25% K rate, and they're not walking that much either, but there's definitely a lot of power in the lineup. Over a 200 ISO to righties, 273 batting average, 348 WOBA, and a 117 WRC plus. So I don't think this is a walk in the park in the slightest for Sixto Sanchez. I'm kind of just here for the talent of him. And if you're looking at his numbers this season, 3 starts, a 27% K rate, only a 1% walk rate, 2.65 xFIP, a 62% ground ball rate, and only a 29% hard contact rate. So Sixto Sanchez, I think the guy's going to be awesome, and he's really fun to watch, and he's got an awesome name in Sixto, so I think that just warrants ownership in itself. So I think he's a fine punt play on this slate. You could also look at Musgrove as well, but I don't really like picking on the White Sox. I don't really like picking on the Braves either, but I'm a Sixto fan, so I think he's obviously eligible, but I think he's viable. Now we'll move on to the bats now. Quite a few good bats on this slate. Really liking the Mets, really liking the Dodgers, and I'm also liking the Padres as well. Dodgers are probably going to end up being my favorite stack on the slate, but it also comes with a price tag as well. But there's plenty of value. So even though I kind of like some of these expensive pitchers, there's a lot of punt options on the slate that we can certainly play, especially in the outfield. So I feel like you're probably going to end up spending up in the infield today. Then outfield, you can certainly find some value to fit in that pitching and some of these high-end bats. But we'll start up top with Wilson Ramos, comes in at 4,400. Always like him versus lefties, and the Mets have one of the highest team totals on the slate. They're actually right behind the Padres and right behind the Dodgers. They're also a lot more cheap. They're also a lot cheaper as well. Now, John Means not the worst pitcher in the world, but he's a guy that can certainly give up some power to right-handed bats. Around a 200 ISO to righties and only a 10% K rate this season to right-handed bats, and a lot of fly balls as well, and over a 400 WOBA. So I like all these righties here on the Mets. Then they'll get to the Orioles bullpen as well at some point. But Wilson Ramos always been pretty solid versus lefties. That's held true so far this season. Over a 300 batting average versus them, over a 140 WRC plus, and a near 400 WOBA. So Ramos, a bit expensive, but he's fine. But I honestly don't see myself spending up too much for a catcher today. But I do like Ramos on Mets stacks, and I like Will Smith on Dodger stacks, and Narvaez, I just kind of like him as the cheap option. But Will Smith going up against a righty here in Luke Weaver. And look, I love the Dodgers on the slate. I'm going to try to get them in my single entry lineup, but they are a little expensive. But I'm definitely going to get some Dodgers in my lineup. They have the highest team total on the slate currently. And Will Smith's been crushing right-handed pitching. He did that last season, and he's done that once again so far. So I guess he's kind of a reverse splits righty, to be honest. But 386 ISO to righties over a 400 WOBA, 636 slugging, and 166 WRC plus. Definitely like Will Smith here, and he could certainly hit a home run. Now, if we're looking at Luke Weaver's splits, past 2 seasons, he's actually given it more power to the right-handed bats. I think all the lefties are in play here, and certainly the righties. Higher WOBA to lefties with a 453 WOBA this season to them, but near 400 WOBA to righties. So I think everybody's in play here. The K rate's kind of been there for Luke Weaver, so he's been striking some guys out. But I mean, I'd much rather play the Dodgers than have any interest in Luke Weaver. And again, the Dodgers have the highest team total on the slate. They're also playing in Arizona, but no, never mind. That wouldn't matter. So just disregard what I was about to say. But anyway, I think Will Smith is a fine play here at 4,000. Just a bit pricey, but should be hitting near the middle of the order. Even if he's sitting near the bottom, I still think he's fine. Then Omar Narvaez, 3,000. If you need a cheap catcher, you could also just completely punt. But 3,000, Narvaez did stand out to me a little bit. Like lefties here versus Spencer Turnbull. Turnbull is not a bad pitcher by any means, but if anything, you want lefties versus him and Narvaez. The splits versus righties so far this season have not been great, but over the course of his past few seasons, he's had some decent numbers versus right-handed pitching. And Turnbull is a guy that we want lefties against compared to the righties. So Narvaez is fine, but if you just need a cheap catcher, just plug in whoever fits at the end because I don't really try to make catcher an emphasis on my lineup most nights. Then dropping down to first base, he's also eligible in the outfield as well. But Cody Bellinger, 5,800, super expensive, but love all the Dodgers here versus Luke Weaver. And I think you can certainly stack them up on this slate. And he's always been great versus right-handed pitching, only a 12% K rate, a 300 ISO. Now this season, the batting average is really down for Cody Bellinger, only a 232 batting average, but we know he's got elite numbers versus right-handed pitching, so I think Bellinger is fine, either as a one-off or just in Dodger stacks, but again, he is super expensive. Pete Alonso, 4,700, a power righty here versus John Means. Pete Alonso has always been good versus left-handed pitching, with over a 240 ISO this season. And the batting average is kind of an awful for him. He's hitting lower in the order, but I like all the righties here versus John Means, and you can certainly stack this entire Mets lineup. They have one of the highest controls on the slate, and they come at a big discount from the Dodgers as well. Mitchell Moreland, 4,100, going up against Chichi Gonzalez here. Just not a very good pitcher, and I certainly like all the Padres here. You can play the lefties, you can play the righties. If you're looking at Chichi's splits, he's been much tougher on righties, but I still think you can play the entire lineup. But definitely like the lefties here. Mitch Moreland, he's pretty cheap at 4,100, and he's crushed right-handed pitching this season, and Chichi's kind of getting blasted by them. Only a 12% K rate, a 565 WOBA, and over a 200 ISO. So Moreland, fine option here, over a 400 ISO to righties this season, a 309 batting average, and a 192 WRC plus. I could see him ending up being very popular. So I would definitely like Mitch Moreland. Then Brandon Belt, 3,800. He's been great versus both sides of the plate this season in terms of power. Batting average versus lefties has been gross, but has over a 300 ISO to lefties and over a 300 ISO to righties. But overall, a much better hitter versus right-handed pitching. And LJ Newsome is not someone I'm going to be really concerned about. We don't have many splits for him because he's barely pitched this season, but I think you can definitely use the Giants on this slate, and actually think they make a decent contrarian stack as well. They have a team total of 4.65, which I could see maybe rising up as the day goes on, maybe getting closer to 5. So I think the Giants are certainly stackable, but I like Brandon Belt specifically at 3,800 because he's been great versus righties this year. Dropping down to second base, it's a pretty weak position today, so I guess just fill in whoever fits. But Jake Cronenworth, he's been great versus right-handed pitching this season, and Chichi Gonzalez kind of sucks versus lefties, so I think Cronenworth is certainly viable here at 313 ISO, a 430 WOBA, 173 WRC plus, and a 337 batting average. Like all the Padres here, so Cronenworth's fine. He's been crushing righties. Gavin Lux, 3,800, just a lefty here versus Luke Weaver. He's actually one of the cheaper options if you're looking at his splits versus righties this year. It's not impressive, but it's just kind of cheap Dodgers exposures for the most part. But I wouldn't say I'm in love with Lux, but second base is pretty weak today. Then we have Jeff McNeil, 3,600. He's been leading off versus lefties. Now, it's not like his numbers are really good versus lefties, but he's not really striking out. 12% K rate, 104 WRC plus, and a 275 batting average. So that's fine, but there's been like zero power versus lefties so far this season. But if he's going to be leading off for one of the top stacks on the slate, he's fine at a pretty weak position tonight. And dropping down to third base, we have Manny Machado and Max Muncie as our two heavy hitters here. Manny Machado, always prefer him versus lefties. And I like the lefties here versus Chi a bit better. But if you're stacking the Padres, if you're full stacking them, Machado is fine in full stacks. But to be honest, as a one-off, I wouldn't say I love Machado because I like him versus lefties better. But Padres are one of the top stacks on the slate. I'd rather play Max Muncie 5,500. I just like the Dodgers just a little bit better than the Padres. And then you get the lefty on righty matchup here. Now, Max Muncie has been fine versus either side of the plate. So I'm not really concerned about if there's a lefty in or a righty. If you're looking at his splits, you got 205 ISO to lefties and a 242 ISO to righties. Overall, has actually been a bit better of a hitter to lefties, but I like all the Dodgers here. Max Muncie's fine. He's just a little expensive. JD Davis, 4,300, and Todd Frazier. So we got cheap righty power here versus John Means. JD Davis, if you're looking at his splits versus lefties this season, over a 200 ISO and near 300 batting average and a 155 WRC plus. So he's a fine option, but I really like Todd Frazier today. Only 3,500. You're going to be hitting cleanup here for the Mets. And look, Means is the guy we want righties against, and Todd Frazier's been crushing lefties this season. 250 ISO, a 423 WOBA, 341 batting average, 591 slugging, and a 164 WRC plus. I think Todd Frazier is a steal today at 3,500. So if you want to save some money at third base and not go with Machado or Max Muncie, love JD Davis and Todd Frazier here for some value, and I specifically love that price tag on Todd Frazier. And then going down to shortstop, I have two options here. I'm planning on spending up, but I like Tatis. If you're using a bunch of Padres, I guess you use Tatis. If you're using a bunch of Dodgers, you use Seager. If you had to pick one just as in cash games, I would pick Corey Seager. But Tatis, he's great versus lefties. He's great versus righties. One of the best hitters in baseball, so I really don't care about the matchups too much. But he's actually crushing right-handed pitching compared to lefties this year. And you guys don't need me to tell you that you need to play Tatis on this slate. He's obviously an elite option, but he's also very, very expensive. By Corey Seager, 5,500. He's been one of my favorite rosters this season. He's just absolutely crushing righties. If we're looking at his numbers this season, a 340 ISO, a 460 WOBA, a 372 batting average, only a 14% K rate, 195 WRC plus. He's one of the league leaders in barrel rate, I believe, this season, the hard hit rate. So I love Corey Seager. Super expensive. If you need a value shortstop, there's going to be some available, but none really stood out to me, so I'm kind of planning on shortstop being a spend-up spot for me today. But definitely love Corey Seager in all formats. Then dropping down to the outfield, we have Mookie Betts, 6,000. He has kind of sucked versus lefties this season. It's kind of odd, but a .027 ISO to lefties, a 249 WOBA, and only a 55 WRC plus. Pretty odd, but he's crushing righties. He's absolutely crushing them by 400 ISO, a 482 WOBA, 357 batting average, and just a 209 WRC plus. Just elite numbers all around. So Mookie Betts is a fine option here. I like both sides of the play here versus Luke Weaver. Christian Yelich, 5,300, just a lefty here versus Spencer Turnbull. Yelich, actually, this season has been a lot better versus lefties compared to the righties. Versus righties, he's struggling. Only a 160 batting average and 191 ISO, but over the course of his career, he's always been great versus right-handed pitching, so I would expect some positive regression here for Christian Yelich when it comes to righties, and I prefer the lefties here versus Spencer Turnbull. Trent Grisham, I can never get this guy right. Whenever I play Trent Grisham, I swear he goes like 0 for 5 with 3 strikeouts. And then when I don't play him, he'll get like a home run or 2 home runs and just have a fantastic day. Now, I think he's only a GPP option because, look, he's $5,000. And I don't really think I'm going to have the money to really just make Trent Grisham the focal point of my lineup. I'd rather spend $300 more for Christian Yelich, to be honest. But definitely like the Padres here versus, especially the lefties here versus Chichi Gonzalez. So if you're stacking them, don't leave Trent Grisham off your stacks. And he's been great versus right-handed pitching this season, so he's fine. I just feel like he's a bit overpriced. AJ Pollock, 4,100. Always like him better versus lefties. Like, he's got elite numbers versus lefties relative to his price tag. To the righties, 231 batting average, 308 on base percentage. But I do like all the Dodgers here, and he's decently cheap. So he's on my radar. Just if you want to fill out a cheaper portion of the Dodger stack, or if you just want a one-off, he's fine. But Corey Dickerson, 3,200. I think he's going to be pretty popular today. He's been hitting pretty well for the Marlins so far, and it's not the biggest sample size in the world, but he's pretty cheap at 3,200. Going to be leading off here. He's always been decent versus right-handed pitching. Numbers so far this year haven't been fantastic, but I would expect these numbers to rise. And Kyle Wright's not a very good pitcher, especially to left-handed bats. And look, a 25% walk rate to lefties this season, a 471 WOBA, and over a 200 ISO and a pretty low K rate. So Love Corey Dickerson, 3,200 leading off versus Kyle Wright. And it's also much better hitting in Atlanta than it is Miami. So that's also another boost, especially lefties. Lefties, the park, I'm pretty sure it does suit left-handed power bats pretty well. So definitely like Dickerson. Now if you need some dirt cheap options, you have Ben Gamel and DJ Stewart here, both facing some pretty average righties for the most part. Ben Gamel, if you're looking at splits versus righties this year, it's nothing crazy. A 240 batting average, a 187 ISO, but he's only 2,300 and potentially going to be leading off here. Strikes out a ton at 33% K rate, but again, you kind of get what you pay for, but he's going to allow you to fit in some of those expensive bats like, I don't know, Machado, Corey Seager, Bellinger if you want. And then DJ Stewart, he is the bare minimum, going to be hitting near the top of the order. And Michael Wacha is like 9,200 today for some reason. I don't understand that whatsoever. I would not be playing Michael Wacha, but I mean, DJ Stewart's like literally free at 2,000. And if you're looking at his numbers, again, not that impressive, but 337 ISO, a 35% K rate sucks, but a 28% walk rate to the righties, 111 batting average. But there's some decent pop here, and only 2,000. And Michael Wacha is just not a pitcher that's really going to scare me too much. Now, he's got a 30% K rate to lefties this season and a 25% K rate to righties. He's actually been struggling a bit more versus righties, but I mean, 2,000. You don't really need much at all. But that's going to be it for the video, guys. I hope it was helpful. If it was, make sure you leave a like. And if you're new to the channel, hit the subscribe button. It really helps me out. I really do appreciate it. And I hope you guys enjoy your Tuesday. And if you haven't checked out the NFL video already, feel free to do that as well.